All right. What are your names?
I'm Caroline McCaffery, CEO and co-founder.
I'm George Rosamond. I'm co-founder and CTO.
Awesome. George, Caroline, are you ready to tell us what you're building and receive some feedback?
Ready.
You have a minute. What are you building?
ClearOPS answers hard questions about privacy and security. So I'm an attorney, and I have helped dozens of startups, companies, B2B companies, close hundreds of deals. And one of the things about closing deals is there's a lot of friction at the very end that drives the account executives crazy. It's a lot of legal and privacy and security compliance that the account executive has to go through. In fact, one time I was sitting in a board meeting and the head of sales was being asked why he didn't meet quota, and he said it's because all of these deals are blocked by legal. And so ClearOPS solves that pain point. We help account executives, privacy and security compliance folks respond to RFPs, security questionnaires, privacy impact assessments, anything on that side of privacy and cybersecurity to get the deal and the sales closed faster. We do have an application in market, and we have seen a 250% increase in usage since January. And that's it.
Good job.
Wonderful. What do you think?
I think clear problem, clear-ish solution. There's some things I didn't want to hear that were added that can be easily removed. For example, 250% growth since January off of I have no idea what base is not an interesting metric. And I think a lot of founders should get rid of like the abstract metrics in a vacuum sort of thing. I have a lot of questions, but most of them are not because the pitch was unclear. It's mostly about the market and the product that you guys are building.
It's a good statement of what you're working on. I think it was you were able to bring your own personal story in, which is what I like to hear, right? Because again, it gives me confidence that you know what you're doing with like a unique insight that again, other people can't easily replicate. I think it was good to hear how you were able to tie a specific problem that you were trying to solve for in like a way that I can understand. It's like, hey, my head of sales is not closing deals. It's because it's stuck in legal, right? And we have that.
So clear.
Right. So like it gets pushed and it like hurts numbers. Like I get that. Like as an investor, I get that. Like, well, my company should be using this, right? So it just resonated personally with me because you were able to tell that story. There's definitely a lot of questions about, how it works, how do you deploy it, like all that kind of stuff. But I thought the presentation and the pitch was quite good.
Let's dive right into the questions. I'm going to ask the stickiest or not one up front. So it's genAI based, so it's LLM based, right?
Yes.
Why won't the foundational models be good enough at some point to integrate into every business's backend in a way that allows GPT-5, GPT-6, or Claude 3.5 with its new artifact system, et cetera, to kind of handle this on their own?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you're talking about the application layer, there's a lot of parts to it that are more than just that technology, right? So what we have built is a collaboration platform where all the stakeholders can work together and answering these questions that come from customers. And in addition, we have other services that sort of surround this whole process because what we're really talking about is risk mitigation and liability. And you can't, these foundational models aren't going to actually have these workflows that are specific to this particular pain point like that.
Great answer. Almost amazing. But I will say no one else. I mean, we have now done, this will be like the 11th session of the feedback loop. And we have a lot of founders who are, I don't mean this derogatory way, but are GenAI wrappers of some kind, LLM wrappers of some kind. I'll ask that question. And for some reason, I can't get people to say this, right? It's the application layer where we bring in team management, access control. There's risk. And so you need a lot of containment around these things. Yes, eventually these foundational models might be good enough, and maybe OpenAI and Anthropic want to build application layers that are pretty robust. But for a user, a business that is concerned about risk, about compliance, about longevity of the data, about XYZ, they're still never going to compromise on these aspects. And so we will always sell a SaaS, updating the foundational model along the way in our back end. Again, the excellent version, I think, does a little bit more specificity. So I'd love to hear, like you say, well, the people who are invited are legal compliance in this way. And they're always going to want to live in a collaborative workspace where there's access control per user. And this access control per user allows legal to see the deal as it's going through the sales pipeline. It allows people on the engineering side to be plugged in only as needed to answer specific technical questions. If you give me some of, that would have just taken it to that next level. Again, you did a great job answering that, but take that to the next level, because then I go, yeah, I don't need to be worried about this whole foundational model thing. They've got something so specific that unless truly, let's say GPT-7 is so good at developing its own application layer for us, then we're all out of business. And venture is like 3 players. But other than that, you have a specific enough answer. So good job.
Thank you.
When does a company start using this? Is it typically at the end of the sales cycle? I'm just kind of understanding, like, if you're trying to like onboard new customers, when do they get plugged into your solution?
Yeah, usually they come to us with the pain point when they're having it, and they want to know how fast can I implement, and I tell them you can do it in 10 minutes. It really is that fast because we use RAG. So you can pull in your policies or any other documentation that you have, and it'll immediately answer those questions based off of the sources that you've given it. So it's an immediate implementation, and it usually is at that pain point when they've had at least a couple of assessments or questionnaires from customers come in that have really slowed down sales, and they're just frustrated by having to answer the same question slightly differently asked every single time.
So another question, like, I feel like legal is getting like such a beating from all of the Gen AI companies. Like, it's crazy. And there's a lot of people that are trying to do something around your space, but I'm curious, like, what do you think other people are getting wrong about trying to solve this problem?
I think what people are doing wrong, a couple of things, I guess I'd say is one, it's always this, and I understand this is Gen AI's value prop, but it's this race to what is the most quick, efficient, fast versus what is the most accurate and going to create the least amount of liability for your company. A lot of people, when you're faced with a questionnaire or an assessment, you think it's faster for me to answer it off the top of my head. I don't want to upload this thing. I don't want to spend time in an application. But what you're missing there is the consistency of your answers and the fact that you actually have a record now of what you have given to a customer that is contract, that is, if you breach, you are now subject to liability. So that's what I think is. It's just I understand the efficiency
achieve
play.
that? Because my next question is going to be about RAG being like a reliable solution and whether or not it is, or whether or not it's expansive enough. So when we talk about like being that reliable for a user who has to answer, let's say, a questionnaire, talk about that. Like, how do we know we're in the right place?
Yeah, so we have a strong commitment to transparency. So everything that you put in, I think what you just said before about garbage in, garbage out, you see everything that's in the platform. You can change it any time. That's really super important. But also when you're dealing with it's an auto answer feature, right? So when you look at the auto answer, you're obviously worried about hallucinations. You're worried about the accuracy from the RAG document. So being able to search through those sources on the same page, talking about UI, which you said you have a strong interest in, being able to see where the AI got its sources from. So it's citing the exact places from the sources that you told it to for the RAG purposes. It's also about seeing who answered or who evaluated that answer. So having the user's comments and additions tracked. All these things go to the reliability of the systems.
There's an approval loop.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
The term we've used is a system of record, because you could have whole lots of data on the system. You could be filling out questionnaires, assessments, RFPs, and so on. But at the end of the day, you need to see where the citations are from. You need the hard evidence. It's good to have the processes that we have, and that's a big part of what we do. You have the structure. Who signs off on what? Who's approving this vendor? Who's responsible ultimately for what happened when? That's great. But ultimately, you also need the evidence to go back to and go, why was this decision made? Is this magic? So anybody could actually look at it, junior, senior person, and go, oh, we answered that we have a SOC 2 because here's the citation. It's not Amazon's SOC 2. It's not someone else's SOC 2. It's our SOC 2. And here's the details.
I don't know if it's related to just like, as you're talking, one of the things I'm realizing that should be thematic as part of your story. This is all going to become more complicated because of genAI as like a usage-based thing, our B2B engagements with each other, and our agreements as to how you're going to use my data and how complicated that gets for an end user who's liable. And that should be part of your pitch, is like, this isn't just the questionnaires we've been getting for the past 5 to 10 years. This isn't just SOC 2 GDPR, whatever else. This is going to be on another level moving forward. And our obligations to each other and the record of our obligations to each other are going to be more sensitive. For deals to get done in 5 years are going to require more lawyers or AI lawyers, not less, right? And like that should be part of your pitch, because ultimately you've answered all the micro really well, but I still have to believe in a theme. And that's the theme that would get me to go, well, what was it called again? The company?
ClearOPS.
ClearOPS is like there for the future version of this problem, not just for the present.
Yeah, you have such a front row seat to seeing what this is, what's happening and what you think will happen. Help us understand that, right? And I think just like that story that you said about like the head of sales in that boardroom, what is that for like where we're going to be like in 5 years, right? Because I totally agree with you. I think it's actually going to be, might be counterintuitive, but we might have like more software to manage software and more people to manage all of this. So like
risk surface area up.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good way. Is like, you're a lawyer as a professional risk manager, right? Like help us understand how the risk profile and the risk surface area is changing and how you're building a solution to help companies actually control it. Because that I can buy.
So should I talk about the number of laws that are going into effect and even how the EU AI Act is now requiring additional AI assessments and how it's just like there's just more and more and more?
Whatever complexity that you can speak to that will make it even that much more difficult, I think that should be part of it, right? Because everyone thinks that like AI is simplifying operations, but it sounds like it's the opposite, right? But that's not what everyone seems to believe now, right? So you have to let us know and help us understand.
Well, and then there's the whole idea of like the enterprises that want it to simplify their operations, but this is the barrier from allowing them to. And we've seen that, right? There are two things that all of these companies will say themselves when they're out in public talking about why adoption is so limited in the enterprise. The two things they say is, one is it's hard for everybody to learn inside the enterprise how to actually use these tools and put them into daily practice inside their work. And two is all of these issues around security, privacy, compliance. So, you're falling into broader theme. This isn't about you, George. I like you. Why is he on stage? I'm asking you that question.
Because I like to have the privacy and the security emphasis that we have as a company also on stage.
I am a big believer in not bringing two to the initial pitch in almost any circumstance. I'd say it does three things that don't serve the startup. The first is there's a dynamic of, okay, what wound up happening by the time we stopped talking? So you had one answer and you had all the other answers. And you don't control that because you don't know where the conversation's going. And you seem competent enough to handle the questions you would let him handle in an optimal scenario, right? It still might be optimal, but you seem competent enough. You don't need that in the first meeting. The second component is it starts to be this like, I want now the CTO style evidence because he's here, right? So now you've created this, well, if he's going to be here, he better say something, right? And so now you've created an expectation that you might not meet throughout the conversation, and you didn't need to, right? Because you're pitching a vision, you're pitching a story, all that sort of jazz. Third, and this is like, kind of depends on, you're not usually going to be on a stage like this and having this dynamic, but it crowds the room. I think one-to-one conversations tend to be more honest because no one's acting, right? No one's attempting to like put on a show. When there's two people, you're kind of a little bit more as the investor, like they're being judged by two people. Two people's emotions are at play. Two people you want to make happy versus, hey, there's one person I'm just going to have a little bit more of a direct conversation. That's my recommendation overall. And again, agnostic to you two, it's my universal. As you know, it's even in the form, you must have filled it out. We say two people can be on stage, but we only recommend one. So
I think your job as a CEO is to raise money. And I think you should be the one leading the conversations. The due diligence will come and like people will talk to the rest of the team. Let that happen in the second or third or fourth conversation. But this is your job and you're more than capable to do this yourself. And I think you got to own that conversation, own that piece, because that is at the end of the day, your responsibility as a CEO to raise money and to sell the product.
Thank you.
With that, you can both get off stage. I'm just kidding. Good job. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.